Welcome to Fantastic Tones for Human Bones. My name is Robert Woods Ledoux. My co-host is here, Mark Pascucci Clifford.
Hello, hello.
And today we have the pleasure of interviewing Val, who is also known as Ascaris. Is that how you say that, by the way?
I believe it's properly Ascaris, though I think I pronounced it Ascaris for at least a year or two before I figured that out. So it goes.
Right on. Okay, so
Trouble
Ascaris.
with
So
oddly specific biological terms.
well, I don't actually know what that is or what
It's a genus.
Is that from something? Is that a
It's a genus of parasitic roundworm. This was a pseudonym I used for a noise project once in my early 20s and did not intend to take over the rest of my life. So such things.
Right on. So, Val, you are, a multi-instrumentalist, a composer, a improviser. You've played in countless bands.
Yep.
What else am I missing here? You're a teacher? You're a music teacher?
I've not been teaching for a few years, but I did teach music instrumentally speaking for about a decade. What else have I done? I think that's about the size of it.
And what's your primary instrument, actually?
An interesting question. As far as instruments proper, I feel like my primary instrument is the bass. As you might have guessed, you saw me pull out the fretless a minute ago. Technically, in college, my major instrument was voice, for classical voice. And I briefly did some jazz sax and clarinet in college too, but certainly not the core of my skill set.
It's interesting. I feel like I've seen and heard you use the saxophone quite a bit as a improvising
For sure.
instrument, though,
For
right?
sure. It's
Yeah.
It's a very, I feel like improvised music is the most comfortable place for me with saxophone. I went through the process of in college of learning to play in a more traditional jazz idiom and get all those bits together. But I got into saxophone initially through there was the Naked City's first album, which is wild, lots of improvised sounds, and the Ulver album Perdition City, which has a lot of just extended technique on it. He is really an astounding alto player. So really what I wanted to do was extended technique, contemporary improvised music with saxophone, and that's a lot of what I focused on. It's been a few years since I was doing it regularly, which I will primarily blame on the plague, though I know some of my cohorts from that scene have managed to get things rolling again. I'll get back on it before too long, hopefully.
Yeah. Are you in Chicago?
Yeah.
Right now? Okay, cool.
I'm in the suburbs now, which makes it a little trickier, but
yeah, Chicago's
makes
pretty big.
access to the woods. It is definitely pretty big.
But in terms of improvised music, that's like such a rich and beautiful scene. There's so much, so many great improvisers based out there. And
yeah, absolutely.
Like places like Hungry Brain, I don't know if it's still around, but
I think so.
Okay.
I haven't been going to shows for a few years either, mostly.
Yeah.
There's always something going on. There's of course the AACM.
Right.
Has blessed us with their work for decades now and are continuing to do a lot of work. It is honestly just an honor to be around those people at all. I've never directly worked with any of them, but there are also a lot of younger performers not from that scene, etc., who have merged, who have worked together, who have their own sort of worlds. There are a bunch of venues that regularly have improvised music, though of course come and go as happens with such things. But there's really just a world of improvised music in Chicago once you find it.
That's awesome.
It's great to be around.
So I kind of wanted to start the episode by playing Nightmare Flesh Offering, the song, or like an excerpt from it. Because it's
one of easily the most radical soundscapes that we ever did as far as that project went.
Yeah.
I'm glad
7-inch around here
you
somewhere.
think that as well, because listening to that, Bob
it's my favorite track to play to people who've never heard Ævangelist before.
Yeah, so when I listen, it's so like emotionally intense for listening experience for me. It's incredible. I haven't really experienced anything quite like that listening to that. So yeah, Bob, put some on. Man.
Yeah, so this is, I'm just gonna play like a minute or so, or 2 minutes of this. So,
wow.
That was
I haven't heard that in a while.
Yeah. That was the track Nightmare Flesh Offering off the album Nightmare Flesh Offering by Ævangelist. Which you're primarily like the vocalist in that band, or the band has since broken up, correct?
I think at that point I was just doing vocals. I think
maybe
if I recall correctly, that's between the first full-length album and the second full-length album as far as release goes.
Oh, there you are.
And
we lost you for a second.
Okay. Yes, I believe at that point I was just doing vocals. I think those were actually the first two songs we ever put together, but we held them off until after the first album to finish them.
Oh.
So they're sort of mixed up in time, but I believe that's before the second album, which is where I first started adding other instruments as well as the voice. I had forgotten how much just pure sounds of suffering I was making at that point.
Yeah. Can I ask a little bit about like the process of making that? Is that because like for me, oftentimes recording, like I do some studio work. I'll also like record improvisations and things where you go back, and oftentimes it's a transactional or just like you have this goal of like getting something done, and then sometimes it's nice to listen back to, and sometimes it's not. And but to create something with that much like emotional depth, I'm not sure how to ask this exactly. What is it? How does it feel when you're actually making that? And
it's a lot.
like it seems really like it must have been a very heavy experience just to create that.
Definitely, particularly in that point in my life, I was really miserable a lot of the time, and I also had sort of taught myself, unfortunately, to not reach out to people as much as I really should have, to not actually engage in healthy psychological support systems.
Yeah.
And so particularly just giving myself the space, and often I would go into seclusion with the lights off. I'd be on my own, and usually literally naked, if not just figuratively naked. It was basically a ritual practice. So while there's the core of those songs, which is much more traditional, just here's the death metal song, here are the riffs, here are the verses, and where these sets of 4 lines fit into the riffs rhythmically.
Yeah.
There was also between those, around those, sometimes I would overdub on top of them. I would just be miserable and embrace that. And honestly, it helped. As heavy as it was, it made me feel better.
Yeah.
In the long run, there's a lot of catharsis going on.
So
I know over the years, it ended up, every time we recorded an album, there was at least one time I got close to vomiting and had to stop. There was,
wow,
always something.
And that's like from being emotionally wrought, vomit.
Pretty much.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just, and the physical force of expelling those sounds sometimes, because you have to pull back to a degree to keep the stamina going, so you can continue making that kind of sound for an extended period. And while I do feel live, there were just times that I felt like I was no longer hindered by having a physical body, and I could just keep going. I knew in the studio I didn't have to worry about it. If I broke myself, I could just stop and go back to it. So I would just go all out and destroy my brain a little bit.
Wow. So the only set of lyrics I can find for any of your projects is for the album Matricide and the Temple of Omega. Do you write lyrics for things, or are you improvising?
It is almost entirely written. I know I'm not sure where the boundaries are in the first couple albums, but I know there was some stuff that was improvised and other stuff that I definitely remember writing but have since lost, which is why some of that's not online. The site Metal Archives has more lyrics than anywhere else, mostly because I reached out through metal community people and said, here are the lyrics, post them. But the reason a lot of the lyrics aren't really around is that they, up until Matricide, they were not published in the booklets.
Oh.
My interpretation of that is perhaps cynical and negative, but it does feel like a lot of the time the other member of Ævangelist wanted to gloss over my presence to a degree. It was an interesting social interaction. I remember a lot of the times people who were around both of us described us in terms of a dialectic, is that we were completely at odds at all times, and that was how the music worked.
Oh, wow.
It was interesting.
Yeah, and so that band has broken up, as far as you're concerned.
Yeah, shocking that it took so long with that description, but
yeah,
it was stable to a degree for a long time. What ended up putting the nail in that coffin, in addition to just how negative our interactions were and how much trouble it was to continue that kind of relationship, and how many times I observed the other member really taking advantage, not like sexually, but interpersonally, with other people, taking advantage of their resources and so forth. I was having trouble dealing with that. And then when I found out that he had in fact gone past that to sexually assaulting someone, which I had sort of known about at the time, but I had not really fully understood what happened. But once I actually talked to the person who had been on the receiving end of that, it was just an immediate
cut it
yeah,
off.
I'm done with this.
Yeah, that
Final
makes sense.
straw.
Definitely. And I mean, when you see what you were talking about beforehand, oftentimes for me, when I've been around people and you see some behavior, like, wait a minute, is that going on? Is that a thing?
Yeah. Are you doing what I think that you're doing right now?
Especially if it's someone that you're around a lot of the time. So it's hard to be like, to, I guess, to own up to it and be like, well, my friend is actually kind of, I need to stop this, but
I feel like I would have figured out more of what was up sooner if we were ever actually near each other outside of the occasional playing a festival or doing a short tour. He lived in a different state at all times when we were working on this.
Oh, really?
My understanding is a couple times he moved because people weren't willing to put up with him anymore. But, so it goes.
I see. So,
good times.
Yeah, so that band existed something like, as far as I can tell, 2010 to 2018? Is that
yeah, so that's my memory. That sounds right. I also understand my chronology by looking up stuff about my own albums, so we're on the same page here.
Bob has made quite a document that you might find useful. He made a nice spreadsheet of your releases in order, I think.
I can just
I'd
share
love to
this.
see that.
Yeah, I'll just share you the doc that we're working off of here.
Hopefully I can figure out technology well enough to...
I'll just it's a Google Doc. I'll just put it in the Zoom chat. I don't know if you have a computer in front of you or not.
I do. If you could throw that at my email, I think I can get into my email. I stopped having an actual computer for years, and all of my habits started centering around my phone.
Okay.
Oh, no, I can't even get into my email on my computer. Wonderful. I have a reasonable grasp of it, though, so not to worry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's... For what it's worth, I just made a table of all the Ævangelist recordings because they were like all over the internet and hard to kind of keep track of. But and then I have, I think, like a fairly or like a decent sort of ordering. I tried to put your recordings, like of the stuff you're involved with that I wanted to highlight in order of the release date.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense to me.
You're involved with so many things. It's
Yeah.
it's like it's hard to go through it all. And also, like, I didn't know if the release dates on that I was seeing, like, on Spotify and Bandcamp, if they were reflective of when the project was actually released, you know?
It does get a little confusing. As I mentioned, Nightmare Flesh Offering was initially recorded in 2010, in 2011, somewhere in there, and then finished in 2013 when it was released. I've got my own cheat sheet up now.
Right on.
And there's some other weird things like that, especially with the last couple albums that I did with Ævangelist. I think.
So I'm curious. What did you study in college actually?
I was a comp major, music composition.
Okay.
I didn't finish a bachelor's degree, but
where did you go?
just a local, like, large and well-funded community college here in Illinois.
Oh, okay.
Harper College.
Harper College,
Which is named after William Rainey Harper, one of the presidents of University of Chicago, who was instrumental in founding the idea of junior colleges. And that is far too much information. But
No, it's fascinating. Okay, but you were also doing classical voice and some more traditional reed studies as well.
yeah, a little bit. Of course, as I'm sure you know intimately, there's generally for music majors, there's a requirement to have a major instrument, which may be at various levels of competence if you are not a performance major.
yes.
As well as, keyboard studies and so forth. And I did all of that. And I really took a lot more classes than I needed for the amount of degree I got. And I included in that doing extra ensemble work and the extra instrumental lessons. I thought it was worth it, certainly.
Yeah. What when you were studying composition, I mean, you've mentioned in other interviews Feldman, Stockhausen, so some of the towering figures of the 20th century. What else were you drawn to as a as a composer, and who else were you interested in from, like, more the academic side of things?
Really, the core stuff that was most important to me, which is part of why I went with classical voice as my major instrument rather than one of the other things that I was conversant in to some degree. But probably the most interesting thing to me still from the classical music realm is art song. For me personally, Schoenberg's Book of the Hanging Gardens and a lot of Webern's art songs are just hugely influential. Suggests that I have made more work in that vein than I have, but they deeply hit home for me, and they were really what I wanted to do when I thought that I would manage to keep on a more academic track long term. I wanted to write serial art songs and dig into sort of the romantic to expressionist sort of vibe of deeply emotional poetry by better poets than myself, worked out through a not too dense sort of atonal harmony that kept sort of a balance. I do think mental health plays a lot into this. Again, I have a lot of history with depersonalization, and a lot of the atonal music, especially from the Second Viennese School, that earlier area, has, I think, functionally just through the fact of atonality, through avoiding the tension resolution dynamic
Yeah.
has that disconnected feeling, and it was deeply emotionally familiar and comforting to me, and I wanted to dig into that.
That's such a great way to describe it, because
Yeah.
I think that's ultimately with like the atonal classical tradition, that's like its blessing and its curse,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that's probably why it was never widely popular, but also
Yeah.
why people like
I know
it.
one of my theory professors in college was of the generation where everyone was expected to focus on serialism, even
Yeah.
people who really didn't like it.
Yes.
And she
Yeah.
was definitely one of the people who really didn't like it. And so we had some really interesting conversations about, and like, she was like really great person and really actually open to understanding and hearing. And we had some great conversations about that specifically, how that emotionally interacted, because a lot of the time I feel like atonality registers to people as emotionless or intellectual, especially with the emphasis on mathematical structures that goes into creating it. People start seeing it as similar to like an algorithmic music where it has lost the human element,
Yeah.
which was exactly not how I took it.
Yeah.
And honestly, really special in that way. And I'm glad that more people don't connect with that emotionally for their own sake, because I don't feel like it's a healthy situation, you know?
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, it was at least some. I don't remember all the individual people's philosophy, but I think it was like Pierre Boulez, at least, that was like really trying to advance the emotionlessness of that style of music,
Yeah, and
or like the disconnection of the human choice or something.
there's definitely there have been a lot more recordings in recent years, I think, or maybe just through expanded internet, there's more access to them.
Yeah.
But especially like when I was in college, the main recording of Webern's works that was accessible was a 6-disc box set, which I have on vinyl now, because that's
Whoa.
I think
not
I have
at
that
all
same
egregious.
one.
Yeah.
The big old chonker one. I love. Yeah, I have that one.
Big old chonker.
It really is. It's one heck of a chonker, as the kids say.
Yeah, sorry.
And Pierre Boulez was the one who put that together and the directing force on that. And I feel like you can hear that it is much more focused on the precise details of following the score than it is on expression, which is still something you can do with Webern and have a like legitimately very valuable product from that process, because the scores are well marked and he really had everything in mind. But if you listen to some more contemporary recordings, particularly his art songs that did not involve Boulez, you can hear people really leaning into the deep emotional qualities that are inherent in the work.
Do you know? Are you familiar with Alban Berg's work?
I never got as hooked on Berg as I did on Webern. I loved, unsurprisingly, Wozzeck. His first opera is, for those who don't know, the most performed opera of the 20th century.
Whoa.
It is
Wow.
the most still successful modern or contemporary opera. I think to a great degree because it draws heavily on the Romantic tradition, and it feels a lot more like a Romantic opera that's expanded into a wider vocabulary of dissonance and vocal technique and so forth.
Yeah.
And it is deeply affecting. I am glad that it's easy now to also find his later opera, Lulu, which was unfinished at his death, and his widow pushed against performances of the version that another composer, whose name I can't pronounce, finished. But while it's certainly a less accessible opera and a lot more to struggle with, it's got a lot going on for it as well.
Yeah.
I need to. Well, I need. Well, I had an easier time getting into Berg. I think I listened to string quartets.
Yeah, there's some good stuff in there.
And but for me, it was kind of like a backdoor because things would just line up sometimes, and I'd be like, "Oh, fifths, nice." You know, like it was easier for me aesthetically at the time to be listening to that, and I feel like I had such a hard time when I was younger.
I always got
getting into the world, you know.
I always got the sense that Berg was kind of like standing in the pool of serialism, but like bending it to his will, like because he
for sure.
I
he
think
wanted
so.
to make romantic music, really.
Yeah, and that definitely has its own value. Is that I feel like he wasn't really as invested in the project of atonality, while still heavily using its tools and finding it valuable.
Yeah.
So he's an important gap bridging figure there. There's a lot of scholarship that's been done by George Pearl, who I have a few volumes over there on my bookshelf. But he focused on the potentials of the serial method for creating more tonal sounding music or more tonally inflected music.
That's Perle.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm not familiar with this person.
No.
I do find, again, much like Boulez, when I was deeply invested in reading the literature and theory in this field, that I often found myself at odds with people that I still felt it worth listening to.
Yeah.
And I felt, as much as I did not want to dip into that tonality, I felt like understanding Pearl's takes and working semi against them in my own work was beneficial to clarifying my own intent in composition. I really should get back to composing. Every time this comes up, it's just like, why am I spending my life on other things?
So
yes,
I'm curious. Is any of this period while you're in college working on stuff like this, is that represented at all, like in the music that's on your Val Dorr bandcamp page?
I think certainly to a degree. Let me see what's on there. Definitely there are no actual recordings of I think one finished piece and a bunch of partially worked out scores, which again, I could just get back to work on those and finish things. Represented in there, but yes, there's certainly a more secondhand connection because my mind was always in that space, even though I was working on other music. There's the Suncarcass stuff, which, except for when it turns into Harsh Noise Wall, is taking the perspectives of working more texturally and with fragments that I got from things like cell-based composition, even though this is not as improvised or aleatoric, properly speaking.
Yeah.
And is in fact concrete music. But having my brain dipped in that milieu all the time deeply informed how I was thinking about things. I had to rein it back a lot when I was working with other people. But
interesting. I wanted to play an excerpt from Almanic.
Almanac, yeah.
I wanted to play the track Alamonic 2 a colon dystrophy.
I love my titles from then, which were certainly influenced from my brain being soaked in that world.
Is that cool? Can we listen to a bit of that and then maybe
Absolutely
tell us a bit about
I
that?
even remember that.
Okay, cool. So I'll play. This is like a chunk kind of from the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of your songs are very long, or like all of your output like your average track is like 50 minutes long.
Which is very funny coming from someone who is deeply invested in Faber and who has all these like less than 2-minute pieces.
Yeah.
Almost
But so
miniatures, yeah.
I'm just going to play like a 2-minute excerpt of this bit. And then we can talk about it.
For sure.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very
I
beautiful.
really, really like that. That's
Yeah.
it's beautiful music.
That's definitely one of my favorite parts of that whole project. So I'm glad we're on
Good
the
job,
same
Bob.
page there. I also enjoy that, at least for me, Zoom was filtering out large chunks of that, registering it as noise, which I think is honestly poetically appropriate.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah, for what it's worth, I'm gonna overdub the
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
yeah. But yeah, you have like, I mean, from what it sounds like to me, like a kind of like this filtered noise bed that maybe is coming in and out at different, or like I'm not sure what it is, but and then like you have piano and then maybe is that saxophone that we're hearing?
This is actually from before I owned a saxophone.
Oh wow.
So what's going on here is that this is that noise bed you mentioned is based on the term I'm used to hearing in the academic world and used here, I think, is live electronics. But if anyone's ever been to a harsh noise show, I was literally just recording a performance with contact mics, distortion pedals,
Whoa.
delays and so forth, that actually one of the cores of what I was doing with this form of the project was taking that, which has to be at high volume to make it work in the acoustic space, and
Is that because of
making
needing to create feedback, or
feedback and just I'm losing the words, but the high level inputs to get the distortion to work in a certain way. A lot of times there are two or three layers of distortion going on. But what I wanted to do was take that stuff that is normally only experienced as an overwhelming abrasive assault, which being around that definitely made Ævangelist seem less overwhelming to me when we did that later. But and making it instead something that was minimal and soft and abstracted. So that is, in fact, those live electronics turned way down. There's some EQ filtering and so forth. I don't remember exactly from moment to moment because I did a lot of different things to make it into a small thing rather than this large abrasive thing. And obviously piano, and there's that whole sort of microtonal chorale feeling thing, which, wow, I think it's really cool that I did that.
yeah,
not like as a compliment to myself, but I was really young then, and I really appreciate that version of myself made those choices and that I now get to enjoy them. But it's manipulated. It is some combination of the piano itself, I think, and I had a collection of like a couple water whistles, some bird calls of various sorts, and I was creating samples of those essentially. That chorale section, they're all slowed down, cut up, rearranged, and with a lot of deliberate or chaotic pitch shifting on them to create that effect.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I really like how it came out.
So
I really liked being able to do something with a lot of dynamics like that.
Are you into the noise scene?
I have been. I've actually, in the last year, I put out a couple noise things, which is the first time I had in like a decade. I had dropped out for a while, but
is that like what are you referring to specifically? Just curious.
The new stuff is the two new things are both under the name Suncarcass. There is much like this was. There is a track on a compilation called 24 Hours of Terror, which is literally 24 hours of harsh noise wall from a bunch of especially queer harsh noise wall artists.
Whoa. Wait, where do you know what label that's on?
It's on Dough Girl tapes. Dough as in the stuff you use to make bread.
Dough Girl tapes.
Looks like Flower Crown was recent too.
Yeah, and there is Flower Crown, which was on Lurker Bias, which is actually, though Alexander, who runs Lurker Bias, is obviously active in the noise scene. I know him from improvised / free jazz music in Chicago. We did a lot of stuff together. But yeah, I had a major surgery in 2020, and while I was on disability and couldn't sit up straight, I took that opportunity to dig back into that fully overwhelming noise sound that I had been involved in the scene like a decade before, and revisit that. I know a lot of the people on that compilation personally just because social connections, but I think Werewolf Jerusalem is the only artist that I was aware of before I sort of dropped out of the noise scene in like 2012 or thereabouts.
Okay.
It's strange coming back to it. It's really nice.
Cool. Yeah, I'll definitely check these out.
They are just overwhelming.
Good.
If there are any Evangelist fans floating around who enjoy how overwhelming Evangelist is, get into the harsh noise wall scene. It is a few levels up from there.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
It's always interesting to me. It's funny that we've been talking, because we were talking about all this academic stuff.
Yeah.
The like near intersection of the harsh noise scene and like proper academic electronic music study. It's like, they're very closely related, yet very far apart at the same time.
Yeah, I think I've previously claimed that the only difference between them are how people are addressed and what building they're in.
That's fair. Probably there's probably a funding difference too, but
oddly enough, yeah, it's certainly a funding difference. I was never involved in the academic side of things. So while I was doing academic composition stuff that wasn't related to noise and experimental electronic music, I was also doing I don't want to call it the pop version because that's clearly not what it is, but the non-academic, the just underground scene version of what noise is. It was a really weird experience, especially because I was just straddling it strangely at a very strange angle. I don't know.
I feel like there's the same can definitely be said. Probably a bit more of a clear connection to me, but like Eiler intense energy improvisation, and I feel like out here where I am in the Bay, there's a lot of crossover between people who are interested in noise shows and who are interested in like high energy free improvisation.
Absolutely.
As well. That one seems pretty clear cut, though. I haven't thought about like the academic electroacoustic composition and the noise scene connection quite as much, though.
The ways they interact are always really strange and interesting. I remember there's a group here called Fat Pigeon, which is like very clearly it's college kids. Well, I mean, they're past college, but like they're formal academic music people.
Right.
Did you say hat pigeon or at pigeon? Sorry.
Fat pigeon.
Oh, fat
plump,
pigeon.
Rotund pigeon.
Gotcha.
Expansive dove. But they're clearly from the academic side, and they are working with these super minimal textured approaches to playing their instruments. And I encountered them, I think, initially when I was doing a set with solely like the stream of Chicago free jazz people who also do harsh noise.
Okay.
And so we had this whole like complex multi-directional interfacing of, because I mean, all of these are just semi-artificial groupings that blend together if you let them. It's delightful. I ended up, there was a project that we did live a few times that was Emily Basil from Fat Pigeon playing bass clarinet, me playing saxophones, and Jana Lee, who's definitely on the noise side of the local free jazz squad, doing voice. And we would just work in near complete darkness, and it was, I think, honestly oddly reminiscent of that early Evangelist recording feeling, where it was very ritualistic and emotional. And we would always play very quietly, and it was very rewarding to have this like DIY crowd just like be willing to be completely silent for that, rather than at one of the shows that we did, like there had been a punk band in the lineup as well, and it's completely different vibes.
That's, you know, this whole vibe that you're describing of like the DIY scene and the willingness of the audience to be patient with the performance, has always been an amazing thing to me. That's kind of what drew me into the Bay Area in the first place, having lived in LA for such a long time, which is like seeing people do like totally wild stuff, and just like in like a warehouse, and like having an audience sit patiently on the floor and listen.
Yeah. Actually, around the time of that Suncarcass bit that we listened to, I was still in my first real metal band, Velnias, which still exists and is great. Their new album's great. Big fan. And it's not just because it has so much personal meaning to me. I legitimately think they're doing beautiful work that a lot of people should be hearing more of than they are.
You played bass in Velnias?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's part of my really being a bassist. It was.
Was that before you went to college?
Yeah.
Okay.
I finished high school. I went to college for a semester, and I was deeply, blatantly mentally ill and dropped out.
Sure.
And I joined this metal band and from that, I got a lot of just real music work experience, real experience of attaching to the spiritual, because Velnias isn't a religious band, but like there is a huge amount of spirituality that necessarily comes into play with the kind of music it is. And having that rooting, I think, was what enabled me to go back to college and be functional and get through a fair amount of it.
Wow.
So I had come off of touring playing metal and went back to college.
I wanted to play an excerpt actually of Sovereign Nocturnal.
Oh, hell yeah.
Are you on that? You're on that, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
I'm playing bass.
All right. I've got if I recall correctly, the full thing is like 15 minutes, so this is like going to be short. But
yeah. So this is me at the age of 19.
Yeah. All right. So this is a bit after the middle, or just after the beginning, I believe.
Yes.
Y'all could see on Zoom that I still know every note of that part.
Sick.
Yeah.
I love that.
So that band is still playing, you were saying?
Yeah, I got to back in October. There is a band which is the project of one of the former Live members, which is after me, but called Extinction, which is an ecologically focused sort of a slam death metal band. And I got to play a couple shows with them in Colorado, which is where Velnias currently lives, opening for Velnias. And so
So you played with
wow.
Extinction opening for Velnias?
Yeah. So I opened for my old band. It was pretty great.
That's cool. And that band, Extinction, I did listen to that, is pretty, I mean, it's straight ahead slam, which seems like it's not something that is represented in any of your other work, interestingly.
Yes, unfortunately. For the people listening, I threw on the stereotypical slam death metal baseball cap, which happened to be sitting here. I love slam. I love stupid music. I love gloriously stupid music, which is really is such a contrast against everything I've done. But
it's cool though. Did you write any of this stuff?
No.
Okay.
For Velnias?
No, either
for Extinction.
For Velnias.
No.
Okay.
Velnias was group writing. The dynamic was we actually had like 2 6-hour rehearsals every week, so we were able to do everything really organically. We didn't write anything down ever. We just let it evolve. Petrus, the guitarist and vocalist, mostly I understand a lot of his initial writing process involved an acoustic guitar in the woods. And he would bring the stuff that had stuck with him from that to the group, and we would start piecing it together and adding our own parts. As a musician, that whole process was really helpful for me, just in terms of like doing the thing and in terms of learning what people always say is the putting the song first thing. Because at that point in my life, as literally a teenager, again, I had been really into a lot of technical, brutal death metal, and my perspective was play all the notes all the time. And I got to learn to pull that back and figure out really where to draw those boundaries, really where to add to something rather than this whole masturbatory shred nonsense.
This music.
Before we started,
this is like strikes me as like more like a folk type metal or something, genre wise.
It's tricky to use a clear single word for it. I feel like as it's matured, like the new album is more clearly like on the artsy side of sludge, like for Amun-Ra or that sort of thing. And we were pointing at that, but there was the folk elements and all spending all this time in the woods, which we did socially, as well as Petrus working on stuff that went into it. It was Velnias is really something special. No bones about it. We started here in Illinois, and they have lived in Colorado for years, because what we would do on tour was spend a couple extra days walking through the mountains in Colorado. Yeah. And they just eventually decided to relocate.
Yeah, I grew up in Denver, and my mom now lives just south of Colorado. So we have, whenever I visit my mom now in Farmington, it's a quick drive for me to go up to like Telluride or like not Silverton. But either way, like these gorgeous places, Ouray, Colorado, like, and I'm still a big hiking nerd because of growing up out there. So
absolutely, it's definitely here. I just have the woods, and the one thing I'm thankful about having moved to the suburbs during the pandemic is that there are woods that just go on for extended periods that I can just walk through.
Yeah.
And it remains just about a month ago, I was just really overwhelmed and stressed out with a lot of stuff that was going on with taking care of some other people who were in crisis. And we went out to the woods and everything was better. My whole immediate mental health improvement, at the risk of being one of those people, oh, don't take antidepressants, go to the forest. Take antidepressants if they help, but go to the forest. Going to the forest is just good.
My dad actually founded a company that's all about forest therapy, and I just went to Portugal with him for a conference on forest therapy.
That is really great. I'm glad that people are doing that like in a formal setting and make it into more of a real thing that people can...
I mean, the conference was basically about finding ways to collect data on it to make it a more legitimate form of therapy that people can like prescribe.
Absolutely blessed. Yeah, I mean, I would love to have my insurance pay for me to go in the woods. Yeah, I'll gladly do it for free as well. But
I'm just curious.
That's really good.
I did used to live in Indiana when I was very young, and
my condolences.
Yeah, well, one of my memories of like just the nature area around there are the dunes by the lake.
I've actually never been to the Indiana dunes. I really should do that one of these years.
Yeah, I was just curious if that was a thing for you, but yeah, they're fascinating to me at least.
I would love to visit. I dropped off for a while, especially while being urban girl, but I used to spend a lot of time in the just going on like a day trip into the nature,
Yeah.
And that is still something that's very important to me. I'm glad I've been able to get back to it a little bit more in the last year or so.
Yeah.
It's important.
Indeed, it is.
Can I go back real quick and just ask y'all for without getting into the whole entire map of metal? Can you give me a real quick definition of slam? What typifies slam?
Well, getting at it a weird angle, there is, how in a lot of dance music, there's just a lot of emphasis on like changes of density and these buildups and so forth.
Yeah.
And drops and so forth. Basically, while it's a very different vocabulary, slam uses that kind of density change and even like tempo changes. Like often it'll go to 2/3 of what the tempo in the last riff was, along with just like chunky rhythms that make it into more of a danceable version of death metal. Again, it doesn't feel like EBM or EDM. It is something designed to make the mosh pit really happen.
That's a really good description of it.
I think about
I feel
slam
like
way too much.
like I got one of my favorite bands to this day is Disgorge.
And yeah.
I've listened to Disgorge. You've shown me.
I probably have forced you to listen to Disgorge many times, but but anyway,
to my benefit.
Like,
yes,
it's interesting because they're in some ways like the progenitors of this genre, but they don't really play the music itself. Like I think Devourment,
they are more on the brutal side. Devourment was how I got into it for sure.
Yeah, they were around at the same time, but a lot of people I like attribute at least some of the vocal style to Disgorge, I think.
That I would have to look at dates and stuff, but yeah, it's definitely a lot of interchange there, or exchange rather. There's also the clearly isn't slam yet of Suffocation,
Right.
where Frank will
Yeah.
like dip a little bit into that vocal sound here and there, and it's just like Slam took that element and exaggerated it. These
Yeah.
like deeper, more gurgling sounds rather than just a roar. I love
like
that.
pitch shifted vocals, you know?
Yeah.
Literally, or they're just going for that aesthetically with their style of
Both.
hold on.
vocalization? Both.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, one of the coolest things about that music, I think, that a lot of modern metal is missing, or at least the early slam, like Devourment, is that like these bands were not recording to a click. So like when they were going into these slower tempo riffs, there would be an actual tempo, like slow, like dive down into it. Like, and like the drummer would be like,
there's all that organic.
yeah. And that little like tempo shift felt so good. Like, yeah.
I think the podcast is called Heavy Metal Bebop or something like that, but they did a discussion
we were
with
just
my
talking
friends.
about this yesterday.
Yeah, we were talking about this.
They talked to Piron maybe a couple years ago, and the boys were talking about the importance of like some of that brutal death metal where it stops being like neatly controlled. You get stuff like Ecchymosis where the blast beats get just like as fast as the drummer can play and not necessarily in sync with the grid of the piece. And it's all that stuff really helps make it.
It's like almost gestural at that point, right?
Yeah.
Like it's that's cool.
It is human rather than the overly sterilized, controlled side of death metal that also developed out of the same roots.
Oh yeah, with like the hyper triggered blast beats.
Yeah, and
you can hear everything completely clean.
And all of the just like emphasis on technical playing. And there's the sort of synthesis of those approaches as well. The last show I went to actually was Defeated Sanity here, which is...
I love them. That's such a great band.
Untouchable in terms of both having that precise technicality and using it for the purpose of those grooves and those feelings and those turning your brain off and running into each other. Somehow at the age of 33, that was my first time bleeding from a mosh pit. That's like very appropriate. It should have been Defeated Sanity.
Wow. That's awesome. That was the last tour they went on just now?
Yeah. So it was March 17th here.
Yeah. I wanted to go on that, but I just couldn't go.
I'm so glad I did.
Yeah.
Used my roommate's birthday as an excuse. We said, yeah, we're doing this.
Right on. Cool. So, I don't know. Can we take a non sequitur turn to Nagasaki Grotesque?
Oh wow, that's very non sequitur. So basically what Nagasaki Grotesque was, and this one I have not revived in the last decade, was when I was working on that Suncarcass stuff, a lot of the feeling is sort of rooted in the fact that I was spending a lot of time alone at night. And that was when I was younger. I had never lived with a partner, which has definitely changed my approach to things. And I would, like, a lot of the feelings got poured out into those Suncarcass bits. Mm-hmm. Again, sort of the weird depersonalized alienation stuff. But I would make Nagasaki Grotesque for myself to listen to during the night. So
Whoa.
it's dark ambient, and it's really long form stuff that I partially, for the joy of making it and that sort of thing, but also it's literally just something I made to listen to, because we didn't have Spotify back then. I couldn't just listen to 10 hours of Lustmord. So I made my own 10 hours of Lustmord.
Nice. I wanted to
Awesome.
listen to this excerpt of Miserable Foundling from the track Silence Reigned Over Shattered Stone and Splintered Wood, segment 1.
Yeah, I had to break them up for Bandcamp.
Oh, do they have a limit?
They at least did when I put this up. Though I think there are like pro versions that may get you over that. I don't know. I've never really looked into it. I'm sure their rules are continuously changing.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll play this and then we'll talk about it. No good place to stop that one.
Yeah, which I think was a part of what I wanted out of creating those soundtracks for myself at night, was that feeling of timelessness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I really, really like this particular one. When I'm listening to this, I have this experience of like my mind, I feel like I'm imagining things in this audio that maybe are there or maybe are not there, and I can't really tell what's going on. And
that's where the titles came from as well, rather than any preconception I had. So after I created these tracks, I listened to them and I attempted to write down what they felt like was happening, even though it had nothing to do with where it had come from. So yes, we're both imagining things in here.
How did you create these tracks, if I may ask?
Yeah, I'm very curious.
These are sort of like the opposite sort of value form approach to working on things, that rather than feeling like they're necessarily something that only I could have made, or something that took a lot of expertise or time or anything like that, which is usually a lot of what people look for in creating music. Is instead, it was purely looking at the end goal, the results. So I was taking like a lot of disparate audio sources, and I don't remember which was which and so forth. I think this may have been one of the ones that was a second generation that was actually made out of another Nagasaki Grotesque quote,
Oh,
album. But
interesting.
I think, speaking of Berg, I think there's some of the Berg violin concerto in here somewhere. And it's all, everything's slowed down, has delay and reverb on it. Like, it is really simple. Anyone can do this type stuff. And it's just there for the goal of what's created rather than like positioning myself as an artist or anything like that.
Sure. I mean, it's basically like a collage of,
Yeah.
yeah.
I appropriately have a very different collage. An ex of mine made this thing that y'all can't see from the podcast, but
I can't quite see that. What is it?
Yeah, it's I'm sure it's difficult, especially in this light, but it's just a bunch of like manga bits pieced together.
I see.
It's just a lot of emotional and physical elements from a bunch of little anime girls. It's a very strange vibe. I really like how she did this, especially because it still manages to have like these weird senses of isolation and so forth, while being literally just bits of anime put together. Or manga rather, I suppose. Not my wheelhouse. But yeah, it was entirely for the end goal.
Wow. So,
I mean, that's true, but in my experience too, you are still your own. You know,
For sure.
You might have these goals, and in some of the composition talks I've had with people, it's like ultimately though, it's still being filtered through you. And so
True.
your aesthetic and all of your experience is still gonna show, and we'll still hear that at the end result. And I do feel like it's, yeah, maybe we could all put something in GarageBand and slow it down and put some delay on it and stuff. But this is still very unique and beautiful
That would
work
be
too.
a fun project. I think get a bunch of people who've never done something like that before and say, hey, here's like the basics of making like this really simplified version of dark ambient.
Yeah.
Can we hear what like just a bunch of like 20 people who've never done it before just putting together stuff and how their own takes inform it?
that would be amazing.
The techniques are a lot more complicated, but I feel like when I'm listening to like a harsh noise wall compilation like the 24 Hours of Terror we mentioned earlier, while it's very tightly within like this super defined micro genre, everyone is making their version of what they think is the way that genre should sound.
right.
So it's all like just really harsh crackling noises for half an hour or 45 minutes or something, but each person sees a different like nuance of the EQ or the crackles that they find valuable and dig into that sound. So I think it's great.
Do you do any field recording?
I don't
collect
actually.
any of your own.
I did a lot of, especially with the Suncarcass stuff, I did a lot of stuff that had like the same aesthetic approach and goals as field recording, but it was just like sounds that I more deliberately made in a space, used in a similar way. I do have the equipment to do it. My partner actually off and on does some field recording stuff, though she's never like created the existence of herself as an artist that others can consume or anything. She just makes things for her own benefit, which great goals.
Yeah, that was always an interesting thing when people do that, because it really shines the light on everyone else who there's an innate desire for most people to share with the world.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that's just how we've come to expect these interactions to occur. It's like we have this model to draw from, and so we play into it. Honestly, that's been something that's been very forefront in my mind for the last few years. Since the last Ævangelist album, I had a lot of struggle with the idea of interacting with the public and with the construct of myself as an artist, and honestly made me not want to make music. And so what I have done in that time is stuff within the improvised sphere and that noise stuff that feels less like there's pressure and expectation from a music scene that is coming from the Ævangelist stuff, and less like I'm going to have to deal with that, because like honestly I've gotten a lot of I've been through a lot of conflict, and I've had a lot of harassment from that scene, and so anytime I'm working on something like that, I am conscious of getting that feedback, and it makes me want to stop. And I've been trying to let go of that and not go into making music with that mindset.
I read these two interviews that I found.
I read those.
There's like a 2015 interview with you and Matron Thorne, and
on Invisible Oranges with Joseph Schaefer, who now I think works for Rolling Stone, of all things.
Really?
Yeah.
But it's clear from that interview that like how, like, I guess even at that time, or perhaps from the start of that band, you guys are receiving like an incredible amount of just hate. And
to a degree,
and there's I guess I wanted to kind of ask you, because and there's also this interview that's just with you that is, I think, later than that, where you talk a little bit about that as well, where you're talking about the black metal scene.
Is it I can't think of the outlet, but it's when I first started about
metal.com. Transcending Obscurity.
Oh.
It was with Flight of Icarus was the author. But I just wanted to ask you, because there's kind of a lot in both of these interviews, like some insider baseball in terms of like the black metal community that even I didn't really fully parse all of that stuff. And I was wondering if you could kind of like summarize, what's the deal with with all that for people that maybe like don't even know anything about black metal, and like why, maybe if you could just say a bit about why you think that there's such a problem there, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of history involved in that. Okay, yes. Yeah, that's what that interview is. But so going back to the roots of death metal, I think what most people know death metal, black metal rather, what people mostly know about that, if they're not involved in the scene, is the story of a bunch of Norwegian teenagers setting churches on fire and stabbing each other to death and stuff like that, and invoking the name of Satan in various ways. And it really set up this whole culture of try hard poser bullshit, to put it impolitely, in which people really just tried to be the most extreme they could. I'm not sure how to find it, but I think there's a Toilet of Hell piece on Nazis and black metal that really gets a good take on some of how this worked, that I recommend reading if you're curious about that. But this sort of valuing and praising being more extreme than everyone else really created a climate in which people who really, for the most part, lived reasonably privileged lives and had nothing going wrong, felt like they had to embrace a lot of really harmful stuff, a lot of really edgy stuff, just for scene cred of all things. And so, and once there's some momentum behind that, it just reinforces itself through further generations. So you get the extensive phenomenon that is National Socialist black metal, for example, where bands are, to a greater or lesser degree, explicitly fascist in their lyrics, explicitly anti-Semitic, sometimes explicitly homophobic, and people feel like they have to play into that to like be the ideal of what they're supposed to be, the ideal of a black metaler that they've received from this community. And a lot of what was a struggle for Matron Thorn, Ruben, we have real names, before Ævangelist started, was that since he is not white and was just like, he was immersed in sort of like this goth aesthetic and so forth, which has a lot of queerness to it, that he got reactions on the basis of race and perceived queerness, which I think there's actual queerness as well, but that's another story, that got him a lot of pushback, while there were some people who really did celebrate what he was doing. Like, there were people who would reject him trying to get on a show or a festival explicitly for racial slur here, homophobic slur here reasons.
Right.
And ironically, I think Ævangelist, like one of the ways that he positioned it that allowed us to get out of that to a degree was the fact that this is, bear with me in the language I used for this, but that I was to a degree a beard. I don't know if you've been around enough queer community stuff, but like when homophobia was more rampant, there was the practice of a gay guy having a woman to like fill the role outwardly of partner to give him the impression of being heterosexual. I was very white and big, and had a big old beard at the time. And while honestly, part of the reason that I got involved with Ruben at all, other than thinking that like he had real musical value to bring, was that I thought he was hot and he knew it. So there's just queerness at the root here. But
Yeah.
the fact that I was able to come off as an acceptable form of metal guy to the community allowed us to bring the persona less into the spotlight and exist to a degree as a band that people could listen to Ævangelist without thinking about these minorities that they didn't like.
Yeah,
which
man.
is again just an outgrowth of this being more extreme than everyone else culture. It's garbage. But
yeah, that is a tragedy because, like, I mean, obviously not everyone, because it is music and a lot of people are there for the music. Like Ævangelist was probably there for the music, and like you're not there for the scene that hates you, obviously, or
yeah.
so it is just some minority, or I don't know what the percentage is, but it's like an amount of people, but it's not all of the people.
Well, yeah, and the problem is you get all this gray space where people are enabling that kind of perspective by not standing up to it. And there's been a movement in recent years to directly oppose it, but it's difficult to figure out how to stand against something within a music scene. Like, what, do you refuse to play the festival and just let the Nazis have the platform, or what?
Yeah, that is oof.
And there are definitely some leftist bands that have like thought about and acted on this a lot more than I have, because I've just not been playing music live for a while.
Yeah.
The second to last Ævangelist show we played in North Carolina 2 days after the trans bathroom bill was discarded, and we played with a big trans flag on stage.
Oh wow.
But that's the extent of our like really pushing that, partially because Ruben, I think because of like the bad experiences he'd had with pushback, really didn't want to stand up for himself / us, because he wanted to just do the thing without having that weight on his shoulders, without having to fight constantly. And you mentioned the Invisible Oranges interview in 2015. Joe had actually found out from a close friend of mine who now has taken over running Invisible Oranges, who knew that I was trans, because we were actually close friends, even though I had not like come out or transitioned. And Joe is interested in asking us about that and how our complex gender experiences, and certainly Ruben's are as well, though obviously he's come down at a different place as far as that goes, how they affected our existence in the metal scene and what we were doing with our music. And Ruben really just actively said, please don't dig into that. I don't want to just have that weight of being the queer band. I don't want to have to deal with that. And so I skipped around the issue a little bit.
That's interesting. Cause like, yeah, I guess to some extent, like you can't, like, if you want to not have to deal with that, like I don't know. That's
even with a degree of allyship with other people, like maybe they have less burden on them to be the queer supporting band, but it's still, I feel like it's asking a lot of people to actively stand up and act on supporting us when there's so much opposition.
Yeah, and I wonder today though, I feel like there's a lot more queer and trans visibility and support. And is that coming through in the metal scene at all? In your experience?
So, yeah. I have not been as much part of the live stuff, but
sorry, go ahead.
There are a lot of increasingly successful bands that have openly trans members. There's Feminazgul with Margaret. There's Vile Creature. There's Sunrot. There's a lot of one of my favorites. Everyone's band names are falling out of my head right now, but Body Void.
Body Void? Yeah,
just really crushingly heavy sludge, which is another thing that I'm into that hasn't really been reflected in a lot of my work.
I to some extent, I almost wonder if there are bands that have trans members that I don't know that they're trans. You know
Probably.
what I mean? Yeah.
Though I feel like the older trans ethos had a lot of emphasis on people trying to avoid being openly trans and just exist and pretend they were cis. And that's like, especially in more recent years, the act of being, quote, stealth has become not the approach we've generally taken as a community. Everyone who's been listening to me talk for the last however long, I am not talking like a cis person. I am not interested in hiding. I've done far too much of that. I'm not interested in even trying to be that. I would rather simply be the complex of things that I am than bow to those social pressures.
Yeah.
Be a preordained construct of any gender, really. Which I think a lot of people within the cis construct are becoming more comfortable with not playing up the assigned gender structures, as much. Hopefully, as we get more into this, more people will simply be able to exist and not worry about whether they're trans or cis or any particular gender and just live. And
that's
that's
exactly like, come on, man, like let's let each other live and create and be who we are, you know.
It's a complicated process to get through that sort of change as a society, and I feel like we've been struggling with it collectively for not just decades but much longer, and figuring out how we want to be. But
yeah, I feel like it's really intense right now, where you have some upward growth and then some like just
reactionary
plummets downward as well. It's like, it's super frustrating. I mean, I feel very lucky to have been raised how I was and to know who I have, and I feel like it's a lot easier for me to have had, like, I've had many trans friends and see people transition and everything. It's but for me it just feels kind of like what we were just saying, just like, okay, that's
cool, sure. Yeah. And I definitely, a lot of younger people, like Generation Z, at least around here, seems like you tell them you're trans and they're just like, okay, and they don't care, and it's not interesting, and that's so good. Big fan of that. Big fan of that. That's the direction.
It just seems from reading the that was 2015, The Invisible Oranges. Yep. And just during that whole time, I just wonder, I don't know, maybe this isn't the right thing to wonder, but if it would have been different now or something, you know what I mean?
For sure. And it, like, things have changed so much. Like, I mentioned my roommate, who is also a metal musician, who is trans. I don't live with cis people, no offense. We do tend to, there's the community and the mutual support.
Right on.
It's Marie from Mesa and Putrescine, which Putrescine certainly seems to have some momentum among, like, leftist oriented, like, death metal fans.
That's the name of the band?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar, but I'll check it out.
Yeah, she does a lot of interesting harmony. She doesn't have the academic background, and so I've had fun like teaching her theory and stuff. But
Oh, cool.
she's got a very like creative approach to dealing with harmonies and so forth, and her compositional style has really benefited that as far as I'm concerned. Oh, that's why I was bringing her up. She's 6 years younger than I am, and
Oh,
uh, I think
Right.
like the first conversation I ever had with her when we were just like long distance internet friends and how we've lived together for years was about how much that's made a social difference to our experiences of dealing with being trans, with transitioning. She actually started medically transitioning in I can do math. I think in early like January, February 2015.
oh,
Oh, wow.
So, and oddly enough, if she had not bailed on going, she was actually planning to share a room with someone who shared a room with Ruben at the festival at which Joe Schaefer interviewed us. It's very
Oh.
weird, small world vibes.
I can imagine that the black metal scene's a bit of a small world when you're
Yeah.
talking about the black metal bands that get to tour.
Yeah, very strange. Because of course that was in her. She's from California originally, so that was
Oh, okay.
her relatively local area. It was just far enough that she would have stayed at the hotel. But because she's younger, she had other trans people around. She had more internet community stuff, and though obviously she struggled with it, like she basically got to go through the process of figuring out she was trans, knowing what that was, knowing how other people handle it, and reaching out and getting medical support and transitioning. And even since then, it's gotten so much, quote, better, more accessible, more visible.
Yeah.
As my experience of transness when I was a teenager was people never get to have a job. People get thrown away by their families. Not that mine would have, fortunately. And they didn't eventually, but basically heavy discrimination and really bad life experiences. And that's why I didn't transition for so long. And while Marie was certainly aware of transphobia being a thing that affected people heavily, like she had other people around her as examples in a way that I didn't.
I was curious if you like, because you kind of mentioned that you hadn't transitioned until later. What was it? Do you think that was because you were intentionally hiding, or was it because that you didn't have examples?
And I feel like if I'd had more examples, I would have not felt so much like I had to hide.
Okay.
So I figured out that I was trans, and fortunately, because of my family, my mom's a Baptist minister, as you'd expect from someone who plays up every negative cliche of the pastor's kid. But she, especially as a woman in Christian ministry in the early 90s, was in an outsider's position and was dedicated to actually supporting LGBT people. So because of that and her like direct activism and putting herself on the line, I had been around a bunch of queer people already. And so instead of I feel weird, what's wrong with me, when like I started figuring out I was trans, I was like, oh, I know what that is. Oh, I'm screwed. You know?
Yeah.
That's
Oh, wow.
that's kind of one cool thing about the Baptist church is that they are like they're open. They're constantly trying to reinterpret the Bible, which
There's a
enables
lot
them
of
to be
emphasis on
open.
personal responsibility and interpretation. Less so in the Southern Baptist Church, which is more centrally organized, but even there, it's part of the emphasis.
Yeah.
And I remember a couple years ago, I don't remember what the situation was exactly, but my mom was involved with the Chicago region. It would be the Archdiocese and a Catholic Church, but the Baptist, American Baptist region. And they ended up drafting a letter together to the equivalent of the Pope in the American Baptist churches.
Yeah.
And notice that that's churches rather than church, right? There's the semiotic symbolism of a greater degree of independence.
Yeah.
Telling him that he was overstepping his boundaries and that he needed to pull back and that he was trying to tell the regions what to do too much. I was like,
wow,
that is such a beautiful thing to see, is people taking up the responsibility to do their own work.
I'm curious now because you mentioned that you are observing Passover.
Yeah.
So do you is that a conversion that you did, or what's up with that?
Arguably in process. Again, have the weird outsider position of being trans that causes a problem with being part of a community. But Ævangelist actually plays into this heavily, of all things. I did the fairly common thing as a teenager of pushing back against being raised in the church, and exploring a lot of the opposition and like having a relatively violent atheist take for a while, metaphorically violent.
Yeah.
And
right.
After I'd been going through that for a while, like both oddly enough through some semiotic stuff, thinking about how the dialectic works of all things, I developed a more nuanced perspective on there's this whole basic atheist take of, oh, I can't see this, it's not affecting things, so it isn't real in a way that I can see. And I was able to, through having a more complex perspective on how being works, how oppositions work, and the complexity therein, get to initially just a perspective of, in some sense, God exists. And I had come across misotheist ideas, which were really appealing, especially with anti-cosmism, to someone who was struggling with being trans, is to the degree that there is a creator God who is in some sense responsible for this material reality, finding opposition to that and lashing out because clearly I get to suffer with this and it's been done wrong and I don't like what you did here. And Ævangelist was working from that perspective.
Yeah, you mentioned like in your Twitter Discog thread, like for a lot of the stuff. I mean, you mentioned that a lot of it's like this sort of like anguish of dealing with being trans and this type of thing.
Yeah. especially because I didn't talk to people about it other than like my partners and like a couple close friends. I had to get that stuff out through music, through art, because I didn't feel safe talking to people about it.
Yeah.
And so that was a big motivating factor in making things in the first place too. So, um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I I'm friends now with Voidhanger, who put out the first Evangelist record. There are a couple Christian artists on that label, and I'm uh, good friends now with Elijah from Panagyrist and Jonathan from Lo Ruhama. And recently, Jonathan was in town. Elijah lives in Illinois as well. And we got together for dinner, and we were talking about how, first in the context of like the Nazi thing in black metal, how putting on this sort of topic of discussing in your music may be superficial at first, but as you live through that, as you keep investing yourself in recording and making and performing that art, it does really become a part of you, whether you want it to or not. And Evangelist, then coming from that initial precept of struggling with misotheism, anti-cosmism.
Sorry, anti-what?
Anti-cosmism, thinking that the material world is fundamentally flawed and negative in some sense.
Oh, okay.
But through addressing that, I spent so much time like thinking about theology, studying theology, reflecting on my relations to that. And that's a lot of that's from like a Gnostic semi-Christian perspective, but I never really latched back onto the Christ part of it and always felt uncomfortable with that part. It never felt like the Messiah-ing had actually gotten done.
Right.
And obviously my friends have different perspectives on that. And I am married now. But my wife is Jewish. And so when I first became friends with her, got close with her, like, I mean, she's a Reconstructionist, so she's relatively secular. Well, she's not exactly a Reconstructionist. She'd kill me if I said that in front of people. But certainly the early Reconstructionist literature affected her, and Spinoza has been a huge influence on her, which is more or less a panentheist take, but I'll leave that to her own interviews. But because I was around her, that made me curious about more Jewish theological perspectives, which I hadn't explored really. And there's some of internalizing anti-Semitic attitudes from black metal scene involved in that. Like, I've been kind of a shitty person when I was younger. But
yeah, most people were shitty when they were younger.
Yeah.
I really look up to the people who weren't. Good for them. I definitely know some of them, and I really appreciate them a lot. Though there's a lot of people will not be as understanding as they might be. But that's a whole can of worms. But gradually I went from, hey, this really addresses a lot of the same theological concepts that were important to me in the Gnostic context, and really there's a lot more scholarship put into this. There's a lot larger community working together on this. There's a lot more focus on what is to be done about these theological perspectives, and it's just a much more robust and complete religious basis. And like, it took a long time to get from that perspective to, oh, I'm eating kosher now.
Yeah.
But like, that is a thing that has happened over time.
It's interesting. It's interesting. Like, there's really like I mean, there's many aspects to religion, but it's interesting to hear you talk so much about theology specifically as like a driving factor for you when, like, I think for most people it's cultural practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And fortunately, I do get a little bit of that side from my wife, which is interesting, given that my family is very white. And here I am using Sephardic minhags, the Mediterranean Jewish customs. So I've been eating beans in the last week, and the poor Ashkenazi are struggling with their potatoes and eggs. They're fine. They'll be fine. Just a few more hours.
I don't know all the rules myself.
Yeah, it's. But yeah, there are regional distinctions in what people think is necessary.
Yeah.
Like I make matzah and charoset, which are part of the Passover Seder. I make them in ways that are from the south of the Mediterranean because I was exposed to them through my wife.
Yeah.
It's really
I have
nice.
a question, or more of a thought. Really, I'm not sure that I know quite enough to talk about this, but like I think that some of the more interesting facets of both Christianity and Judaism have to do with ritual, and there can almost be like this sense of magic sometimes when you get far enough away from like the blatantly problematic things. Like I was just, like I said, in Portugal with my dad, and there's a lot of like old Catholic stuff there, and it feels different to me to be around that. Like, and you do feel like a sense of this deep quietness and this deep, magic almost. I don't know how else to describe it, but I think a fascinating thing about that is it allows people to create from a place that's larger than themselves. And you're talking about like Christian black metal now, potentially. And do you feel like your experience with Judaism might be able to filter its way through in music that you're creating in that same sense as well?
Yeah, I'm curious to see how that actually happens. I think some amount of my perspectives, which like, though a lot of it was just really kind of out there mystical takes in Ævangelist, rather than like going through and explicitly talking about things. I think there's a lot of commonality in how I was viewing things, and that really what it was is, I believe my wife, like a couple years ago, even said, "You're basically a Jew at this point." So,
yeah. But I mean, you've said the word ritual many times to describe how some things have been made, and maybe this is just going to be another facet of that, another source of ritual.
Relatively contiguous in that a lot of mystic work, and there's a very rich mystical tradition in Judaism that is obviously important to me. As a very like postmodern leftist, whatever perspective you want to have on how I exist in this society, Joker moment, in terms of talking about gender abolition, stuff like that, as I have been, capital abolition, you might reasonably expect me to have a much more, quote, rationalist take on religious practice, in terms of oh, well, those are old historical facets that we don't need or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there should be some reform people here to balance out that perspective. But I am instead coming from a position of sincere belief in the importance of upholding the commandments is a confusing word because it sounds like I'm talking about the 10, where there are hundreds of mitzvot. But if you don't speak
Yeah.
Hebrew, that's useless. In upholding those ritualized aspects of daily life and of celebration as part of a work of cleaving to God and it is much more, quote, magical, as it were, than a lot of people's experience of interacting with, especially Christian communities, where a lot of like, despite the fact that you'll still have people like condemning homosexuality on a legal basis, a lot of the law that was present in Judaism was explicitly abandoned in the early proto-Christian movement. Even in scripture, there's Acts 21, 24. I'd have to double check that, in which the mitzvot that are required of Gentile converts are drastically reduced to a limited subset. So while Christianity since developed a lot of its own specific practices and obligations, there is more of a focus, generally speaking, on, prayer and faith, embracing the role of Christ as Messiah and so forth. And of course, there's a lot of variance between denominations and individuals there, but rather than a lot of detailed ritualized action, obviously being trans and not straight at all, well, I'm not gay at all either. Anyway, sexuality aside,
yeah,
I don't fully align with some of the more conservative Hasidic perspectives on halakha and mitzvot, but I tend to agree with them that the ultimate goal is doing these things in accordance with like explicit obedience to and becoming as God intends.
Yeah.
In search of a larger scale unification. Again, cleaving is a word that's used, or in translation, to God in there's a lot of symbolism of marriage around this, in that
like you being married to God,
but not me personally, but us as Israel or as humanity, which, in keeping again with a lot of Gnostic perspectives, are in a sense fragments of God, crossing the separation that we have by being extant within a material framework and reaching again for that unification. So this is while I am trans and bisexual or whatever, I'm still working on a lot of detailed directions to action, even though I legitimately just cannot without reversing myself, without massively changing the basis of who I am, I cannot do some of those things. I cannot be fruitful and multiply with my wife. I don't have any reproductive organs.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in as much as I can, within the context of my life and my body as they are, I try to keep increasing my dedication to those commandments and helping to build the larger communal action in that direction.
We were all given a different lot in life.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow. Yeah, thank you so much for talking about that. That's I really appreciate you sharing out on that, man. It's really amazing for me to hear different people's journeys, especially yours, and how you're thinking about this and I know it's got to be complex, you know, to like redefine this relationship after you know what you talked about coming up in the church.
Pretty direct sundering afterwards too.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's happened. I'm glad that while there have certainly been exceptions that I've had access to and been willing to engage with people who were already more actively working in their religious contexts, who were not sundered, as it were, who were comfortable with that.
Yeah, so you mentioned What was the name of that band? Grace?
I think Elijah actually says Panegyrist. I habitually say Panegyrist. But one of the other I Void Hanger bands, they are really, in my personal opinion, really spectacular work.
Yeah, that's one of that I definitely have picked up. Did you know that I am on? I don't know if I mentioned this to you.
Oh, I did not. What are you? Or who are you aside from yourself? Wow, we're back to the construct of the artist.
Yeah, I am the artist Onkos on there, which
okay.
I don't know if you've heard that one yet or not.
I have not been delving into a lot of it. I know actually Marie has. There were a bunch of I4 Hanger releases yesterday, and she listened to all of them. So she's more in touch with what's going on than I am.
Yeah,
One big family.
Yeah, that was actually, so I got into this label. One of the very first, I think what brought me was actually the Jute Jite split with Spectral Lore, because I've been a fan of Jute Jite for so long. And then Matricide in the Temple of Omega was like released very soon after that, which was like my introduction to Ævangelist and your music.
That is one of my least favorite Ævangelist albums, but
really?
I've talked to some people who really like it, and I can see abstractly how other people value it, even though I like some of the lyrics. And there's some good bits, but like overall, it's not my cup of tea.
Why is it your least favorite one out of all of the ones?
I don't really like the production aesthetic in terms of like it's sort of raw and grainy in a way, and I can certainly see valuing that. I just don't, especially coming from the record we did on $20 Spin, Enthralled to the Void of Bliss, which has a much more polished sound and manages to retain the complexity. That's really where I would have liked to go. And it has more compact and focused songs a lot of the time. And the songs started sprawling out, and sometimes they felt to me like we needed to revise them more than Ruben was willing to do and cut them down. But we compromised. We did what we did.
Right on. Well, anyway, it got me hooked.
Yeah, I'm glad.
I was fascinated by that album. But then Luciano was such a gracious person.
Yeah.
Hooked me up with a release later on for my project.
He puts out a lot of really innovative stuff. Like, I feel like anytime someone's operating somewhere, and I'm not surprised, honestly, from having talked to you about music, that you are in that zone, but somewhere on like an intersection of more experimental vibes and metal and doing like really creative work, Luciano really consistently picks up a lot of excellent stuff that is bridging strange and interesting gaps that no one else is doing.
Yeah, did you know that he was he got sick for like he was in the hospital? Yeah. That's pretty crazy, but I'm glad he's better.
He's doing better, right?
Yeah.
You said he was doing.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
Which is a low bar when you're in the hospital, but he is doing better.
Yeah,
I haven't been in touch with him for a while, but
he told me that he lost his like ability to move, or like he lost mobility somehow.
What?
But so he's got a long road to recovery. He told me this back in February or March or so, but
yeah, and that was like right when it had first.
Yeah.
He had just been in the hospital. I do hope he's doing well. I got out of the habit of talking to him a few years ago. But I value his contributions a lot, and I think he's a really worthwhile person.
Yeah, agreed.
Obviously. I've been very glad to be part of that extended family.
Yeah, me too. We're actually I have an Onkos release that has Mark on it that should be out this year.
Hell yeah.
So,
I play a vibraphone solo on it.
Nice. Yeah, that's one of the things that was never an Evangelist. There was never vibraphone. We got lots of other things, but
yeah.
What can I say? And some marimba too, right, Bob? I think.
Yeah, marimba too.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about Enthrall.
Yeah.
Can we play a bit of Gatekeeper's Scroll?
Hell yeah, we can. I love that song. I made sure we did that song live a couple times while we were still doing that.
Okay. Excellent. All right. So this is Gatekeeper Scroll from Enthrall to the Void of Bliss.
Destroy
So, you had written, or you had said in the interview that there's quarter. You said you were talking about something else, and you were like, as well as introducing relatively simple quarter tone grid melodic contours for the upper register parts. Is that? What instrument are we hearing?
That's an auto harp. Actually, it's I think it's just listed as a harp in the CD, but we also, one of the shows we did where we played that song, we used a big chromatic klezmer hammered dulcimer for those parts.
Whoa.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was cool. It was unfortunately hard to hear in the live situation, but so it goes.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot going on with that. The guitars are just in their strange tuning with 12 divisions of the octave. I think the auto harp is dynamically microtonal in that it is not like according to a specific grid or intent. The where I was using the quarter tones on this album there are parts where I am singing like at the upper range, the highest I can sing, and it does end up sort of blending into this strange mass of chaos that's going on. But
yeah,
those vocal parts are on the quarter tone grid.
Oh, okay.
Felt the need to do that for some reason.
Is that something that are you at all into the whole microtonal thing, or?
Absolutely. Actually, one of the things that really made me want to go back to college when I did was through Bluegrass Nord in an interview talking about microtonality and serialism got me to like explore those worlds and fall in love with them, and made me want to go back to school and be a comp major.
Cool.
Huge influence on me. The stuff I'm working on right now, which hopefully will turn into some cool music that people can actually listen to. I am getting the hang of some more like synth programming, electronic composition techniques. I say it that way and it makes it sound like it's from that academic school. I mean dance music. And I am doing that. The project file, the specific song that I've been working on, is currently something that's in 17 divisions of the octave. I have a fretless guitar that was originally for my old doom band Vanal, which I played drums in. Which did a split with Jute Kite, speaking of. Which it was actually for that split. And that guitar is marked in both 17 and 19 divisions of the octave.
Oh, cool.
So what I am trying to do, and the thing that I think of as my personal successor to Ævangelist, is work specifically within those microtonal idioms, draw material from like Ævangelist, from Bluegrass Nord, Gnaw Their Tongue, stuff like that, as well as from, I listen to a lot of goth music, a lot of darkwave, EBM, stuff like that, that is centered on electronic beats and so forth. And I want to hear how both of those genres adapt to each other and to the specifically microtonal framework.
Whoa. This sounds really dope.
Yeah. I hope so. Like, it sounds really dope. I hope I can make it actually be really dope. I'm trying, but also working. And there's not a whole lot I can really compare this to, but in the world of art pop, which is a horribly vague, not genre, but Jenny Val is really this very unique artist who I think blends together a lot of there are a lot of minimal things going on with the instrumental portions of her work, but in a way that's pieced together, somehow creating the effect of a song while also creating the effect of just different things happening at different times, more like a narrative that happens to be musical. And she'll drop between singing and just speaking to us in really interesting ways. And she has...
Can you say what's the name of the artist again?
Jenny, I think it's pronounced Val. I don't know. It's HVAL.
HVAL.
Who, interestingly, when she was 19, was in a gothic death doom band.
Cool.
Everything coincides, but
yeah,
she has this interesting combination of very direct narrative speech, but also a lot of really abstracted symbolism that vibes with how I would write lyrics with Ævangelist that have all these disintegrating reality mystical images. And I want to be able to use that as an influence on how I am more directly making the texts accessible and comprehensible in a way that doesn't just turn it into songs in a strict sense. I'm trying to... We'll really see once I've got an album done or an EP done or something what this actually comes out as, but I'm trying to merge these different things that I think are significant to me and have that potential to work together. Programming synths microtonally is a whole can of worms, and I'm looking at my pitch bends programmed into this audio project right now. They're obnoxious, but
it's funny. We did an interview that we released a little bit ago with a composer, Danny Meyer, who has a programming language that's designed for microtonal.
Bless.
And also we have an interview that we've not released yet with Brendan Burns, who works in 22 and 27 EDO.
That's fun.
And he's got those guitars,
Yeah, with the actual frets for it. There's actually, in a more positive way, one of the things that allowed me to take a step back from feeling like I had to make things. There's a friend of mine, actually, Vivian, though we've not been in touch for a while, but her project Victory Over the Sun is super worthwhile, and it varies from sort of that in the neighborhood of Jutgeit, but maybe more personal and emotional, to something more in line with death metal.
Oh, cool.
And she's
one
of the people
in Portland?
Yeah.
Okay.
She is one of the people who actually does microtonal refrettings of guitars. I actually originally know her from the Zen Harmonic microtonal Facebook group years ago.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. So much stuff to check out just from this interview.
Yeah,
I know. I'm excited.
Partially the influence of there's the Blue Nord album Mort and some stuff since then that they did with fretless guitars. And I really liked the dimension that allowed them to bring to how they were writing. And that's one of the reasons I have a fretless guitar rather than a refretted guitar. But that makes it harder for me to deal with like 22 or 27 since I have to do the intonation myself. Struggling with 17 and 19 is enough.
Yeah.
I really mostly do 17 as well because Vivian has done stuff with 17.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another.
How do you think about it when you're? Do you have a way of hearing it, or like when you're thinking about working with something odd like 17?
There's a lot of like. I think really the basis of how I'm working cognitively is related to sort of the pitch class set based takes on the like small picture, the micro level in serial writing that I did previously in 12, where like a lot of like these specific trichords or tetrachords and their permutations have a vibe that has what I'm going for, and how can I make them interact with each other.
I see.
So that's kind of my cope for dealing with all the extra pitch classes, is like looking at like a trichord, tetrachord level, and rather than trying to do functional harmony, just doing these more isolated harmonic simultaneities that work together.
Yeah.
I feel like
finding things that work and playing with them more or less.
Yeah, I feel like if you listen to Enthrall, and not that I was even the one doing a lot of it, but you'll notice that like a section will have the harp will sit on a certain odd pitch collection for like a bar or so, and then move on to another one. And there are usually one or two layers of lead guitar that are really just adding another pitch collection to that, as well as the rhythm guitar that's doing a much more traditionally, quote, a riff.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, if I'm misremembering, like the first song on that album has like, it starts with the lead guitar doing like a bend up to like a microtone. It's like the first thing you hear on that album.
Yeah, we did that song live a bit too. Yeah, and it's this whole weird like 2.5 minute long section of more or less repeated motifs, like just going off doing the ostinato thing against each other. It's a really strange mental place to be in, especially doing it live rather than just listening to the records. And the lower guitar has this like weird series of permutations that are like, it's really a really simple thing, but it changes in these odd ways at these odd times.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to ask you about this. I think when I first messaged you on Facebook, you had said that like you could talk a lot about having transcribed Ævangelist music and like to play it live or whatever. And and I was just like curious, like how, because like a lot of your output, it's the songs are very long and they're really dense, and it's hard. I mean, just as a listener, like without having transcribed it myself, like just to be like, okay, like you hear a change when it happens or whatever, but you're like, how do you know when you're in that music, how to like space things out? Like, are things open-ended? Because you guys are playing with a drum machine, right?
That's what we did on the record, and live we were playing with an actual drummer. Who his job was a lot. I am sorry, Sal.
Wow.
Big kudos. He's also a kid from the noise scene, oddly enough. But getting all of that to work together live was an interesting challenge, and there were definitely songs that we just avoided trying to do because it would be too hard to adapt them. I remember with that first song on Enthrall specifically, Arcanae Manifestia. I feel like anytime I like switch to this like Latinate, suddenly the Indiana accent kicks in a little bit. Gotta balance it out. But we went through that intro, which is really simple on some levels, so many times, just trying to get the hang of knowing when to come to the next progression. And we all really just had to internalize what the lower guitar part was doing, which was Joe Park for those live sessions. And he was a real boon to us because he was really able to like really internalize, like really get all of those bits down and know this stuff inside out. And the rest of us really had to not just consciously but subconsciously internalize this change in Joe's guitar part, which is simple, means that there are going to be like 6 more repetitions of Aaron or Mia's guitar part over that, and we're about to do the thing where Sal will give us the definite cue that he is in sync by doing this one like drum hit. And then the whole thing recoalesces as this different thing as the song kicks in. And that whole like trance-like vibe of that whole section was really important to me because back to your religious ritual element, the beginning of the vocal part in that song is like there's the metal vocal technique, but it is, I have to do the sort of dislodging the conscious textual brain, and it's basically speaking in tongues. It is doing the deliberate disconnection from that more grounded text for the first however many bars of that section. And then I have to come back. I have to go back to thinking in English.
Should we listen to a bit of this?
I think
sure. So. Yeah. If you want to come in like 2:15 or something, you'll get a chunk of that intro and see how it coalesces.
Yeah. Cause it's okay. I'll just drop the needle about 2 minutes in. Yeah,
it's fun.
That's a great album. You made yourself upside down to us now.
Yes, I've had to plug my phone and I can't figure out how to make it vertically correct.
It's all good.
But like even immediately lyrically right there, some of the words are very strange and reflecting that the text is just struggling with that the anti-cosmic perspective and like the concept of deliberately casting off that connection to the material.
I wish that more of your lyrics were available because the
if you go to Metal Archives, that album
you
is
did
all
mention
up there.
that.
That one I didn't lose any of.
Yeah.
And
your lyrics are quite
first
good.
line written, thank you. First line written there is, quote, just not words, which is that speaking in tongues section.
Oh, yeah.
And
not
that
words.
I think is a lot of going from the fact that I was working on writing and doing the recording in the weirdly isolated, like ritual headspace allowed me to just feel that I needed to drop out of the rationalist sort of approach to the text at this point.
Yeah. Crazy.
A lot of me being crazy, legitimately.
Yeah.
But
very cool.
Yeah, I'm very happy with that album. It is even obviously I'm trying to make more music, but if I never made more music again in my life after that album, I wouldn't really be disappointed. I think that album is, well, I think my life experiences and perspectives and so forth have changed enough that I still have things to say that I really do need to say. I feel like getting to the point of, oh, we made this album. This is a cornerstone that is deeply satisfying.
Yeah, it's a good feeling.
Yeah.
I am pretty far from that. I'd say, and what
I feel
I've
lucky
done
that
versus
I did it.
Yeah, but I'm really excited about what you were just describing that you're working on too.
Yeah, it does sound very cool.
Yeah,
be staying tuned for that for sure.
I've got the balance of like that sort of ambitious, but not too ambitious. Like there's definitely a lot of deliberately cutting it down to, dance music and pop, and just simple black metal stuff.
Are you doing like singing or black metal vocals or like
both probably?
Both.
That's been my intention.
Wow. Okay.
Like really, I actually did a bunch of skeletons of songs in 2017 that I lost. I became technically homeless for a while, though fortunately I had family I could stay with.
Oh, wow.
And like that's actually, I made Matricide during that period, which influences my perspectives on it.
Wow.
But that was, everything was a wreck. And so coming back from that was a lot. And I lost those songs in the process just because the computer I had done them on really just got old and bit the dust.
Dang.
So I am, again, with new eyes and ears, building skeletons of songs. And how they end up getting fully fleshed out is, time will tell. But it's my intention to have some of both for vocal approaches. I think the pop and goth dance music is really more important to me now, but I feel like there's something from the metal side that still needs to be present on some level. So I've been making places for it and thinking about it. And,
Cool.
you know,
Yeah.
good times.
Well, this seems like a good place to kind of wrap it up.
All right. Thank you very much.
There's so much more to. I could continue to talk about like your improv stuff for.
Yeah. There's the improvised doom band and the improvised folk band with the soft singing.
Yeah.
I was just really productive a decade ago.
Yeah, I guess that is that long ago, huh? All that stuff.
Yeah, a lot of it is.
Time does fly. Time has really flown by in COVID times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I keep having the experience of realizing that when you say something like, you know, what seems like not too long ago to me is actually a very long time ago now.
Yeah.
I think.
And
Like something like 2008 or 9, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh yeah, that was.
yeah. And
But that was
even like 2018 is a lot longer ago than it seems.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's 4 years. Yeah. Yikes.
Yeah.
Well,
Time
Yeah,
is
I mean,
doing
and-
things.
and we'll do, you know, you have such a extensive discography and varied, and we'll make sure that we share everything that we can, because I highly encourage people to check out your saxophone improvisation work as well. Like we didn't touch on that.
Maybe we could
unfortunately,
go
'cause-
out on one of those tracks.
Yeah, I think I love the I like the ADFL, and then the duos that you're doing. I think
Oh,
with
that was
the
fun,
with
yeah.
same Keenan.
Yeah,
right?
that
Keenan
was
Foley?
that duo with Keenan was actually, we did a show where it was the Val and Keenan duo, and also Corey Lyons and Alexander
Uh-huh.
Adams were doing a duo set, and we talked after the show and decided to try doing a quartet, and that
Yeah.
became a thing.
Yeah, let's listen to maybe we can go out on just a bit of that.
The quartet.
But I think so. And then, so Val, if people so wish to find you on the internet, do you have anywhere that you'd like to point them? I mean, we'll be pointing to all your bandcamps and everything. But probably the valdor.bandcamp.com.
Yeah, which
Right.
has only like limited odds and ends, sadly, but they're interesting odds and ends. But,
No, I like all that. That's your collected works, right? Coming from different places. That's not
yeah, it's basically everything that's left over that wasn't on a label. So like
right.
some of the band, like basically everything that was a band that was ongoing, which seems kind of like the core stuff, wasn't on there. So it's all just like things I did myself as a teenager, and strange little odds and ends in between.
Yeah.
More experimental stuff.
Well, we can direct people to your Twitter where you have your thread.
Yeah, that's my current @ is @their_wings. And there's that thread of links there, and if you want to socialize me, do so at your own risk. Socialize with me, do so at your own risk. Entirely welcome. And if I am too unpleasant to deal with, understandable.
Right on.
Well, you have been entirely pleasant.
Yes.
Oh,
This
yes.
has been a wonderful. Thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast. Like, it's really great to talk with you.
Super cool to have you. It's really, really, really amazing. And thank you for your generosity with your
course.
time and sharing so much. That was amazing. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's nice to dig some of that out once in a while. Lots of nostalgia.
Yeah. People can find us on Twitter at @tones_FOR. Insta FT number 4HB. And if you feel like supporting us, you can find us on Patreon at Fantastic Tones for Human Bones.
Yeah. There's also Facebook, if you're so inclined. The old Evangelist page is still me. There are 2 Evangelist pages now, but I'm sure you'll be able to figure out which one is very edgy and which one openly talks about communism. The communist one is me. But
yeah, we're on Facebook as well. So when we post this episode up, we'll link. We'll tag your page.
Yeah,
people
I
are also
have it.
welcome.
I'll make sure I link to it, the right one.
People are also welcome to visit me at Valerie Dorr on Facebook, which it's not a very personal place, so you can come hang out.
Cool.
All right.
Cool. So
Sweet.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course.
Bye.